I still remember every eerie detail of that night. It was late October, a chilly, moonless evening in rural Pennsylvania, and I was driving back to Pittsburgh after visiting some friends out in the countryside. A trip I'd made plenty of times before, but somehow, that night felt different. I'd shrugged off the unnerving vibe, thinking it was just a combination of exhaustion and an overactive imagination. Looking back, I wish I'd paid more attention to my instincts. The drive home was supposed to be about 2 hours, and the route was a mix of winding back roads and stretches of dense forest, eventually connecting to the main highway. The roads were mostly empty, which wasn't unusual for that time of night. As I left my friend's cozy, well-lit neighborhood, I could feel the isolation settling in, the weight of silence pressing down as trees lined either side of the road, their shadows dancing under my headlights. About 40 minutes in, I noticed my gas gauge dipping lower than expected. I cursed myself for not filling up before leaving. I knew there was a small gas station about 20 miles down the road, a rundown place that barely passed as a pit stop, but it was my only option. With my tank getting dangerously low, I pulled into the station, its single pump illuminated by a flickering fluorescent light. I parked and got out, glancing around for an attendant, but there was no one in sight. It didn't surprise me. This place was always empty. As I started pumping gas, I noticed something, or rather, someone, out of the corner of my eye. Standing at the edge of the gas station's property, just beyond the reach of the dim light, was a figure. A young woman, maybe in her early 20s. Her hair was dark, and she wore an old-fashioned knee-length dress that seemed out of place. She wasn't moving. She just stood there, staring in my direction. For some reason, I felt compelled to help her, though I couldn't explain why. I waved, calling out, "Hey, do you need help?" She didn't respond right away. Instead, she took a slow, deliberate step toward me, her eyes fixed on mine. There was something unsettling in her gaze, a mixture of sadness and desperation. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Can you give me a ride?" It was a strange request, but something about her presence made it impossible to say no. I finished pumping gas and gestured for her to get in. She moved slowly, almost dreamlike, and opened the passenger door, settling into the seat without a word. As we pulled out of the station, I noticed the faintest hint of a smile on her lips, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to ease the silence. She looked straight ahead, her face illuminated by the glow of the dashboard. "Just down the road," she replied, her voice as quiet as before. I nodded, not pressing her for details. We drove in silence for several minutes, the road stretching endlessly before us, flanked by trees whose branches arched over like skeletal hands. The longer we drove, the colder it felt in the car, as if the air itself was seeping away any warmth. I turned up the heat, glancing over to see if she looked any more comfortable, but her expression remained distant, as though her mind was somewhere else entirely. The silence grew heavier, and I found myself glancing at her more often than I meant to. There was something unsettling about her presence, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. It was like the air around her was different, thicker, colder. I shook off the thought, focusing on the road ahead. But as I did, I noticed something odd. My rearview mirror seemed darker, as if a shadow had settled over it, obscuring the back seat. "Are you okay?" I asked, feeling an inexplicable sense of dread creeping up my spine. She turned to look at me, her eyes suddenly hollow and lifeless. "Do you believe in ghosts?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. I let out a nervous chuckle, thinking she was trying to spook me. "Not really," I replied. "Why do you ask?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned back to face the road, her expression unreadable. We drove in silence for a few more miles before she finally spoke again, her voice so quiet that I almost missed it. There was an accident on this road years ago. A car went off the side, down into the ravine. They never found the driver. Her words sent a chill through me. I'd heard stories about this area before. Urban legends about hitchhikers who vanished without a trace. Ghostly figures who appeared on the side of the road. I'd always brushed them off as local lore. Campfire tales meant to scare tourists. But sitting there, alone with her in the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was part of one of those stories. I tried to lighten the mood. So, are you telling me I've picked up a ghost hitchhiker? Her lips curved into a small, sad smile. Would you believe me if I said yes? I laughed, though it sounded hollow even to my own ears. I guess I'd have to see it to believe it. She didn't respond. Instead, she leaned forward, staring intently at the road ahead. Turn left up here, she said, pointing to a narrow dirt road that veered off into the trees. I hesitated. I'd driven this route dozens of times and had never noticed that turn before. The road looked abandoned, overgrown with weeds and branches that clawed at the edges. But something in her tone compelled me to obey, and before I knew it, I was steering the car onto the path, the trees closing in around us like a tunnel. We drove in silence, the only sound the crunch of gravel beneath the tires. The air grew colder, and I could see my breath fogging up in front of me. I glanced over at her, but she was staring straight ahead, her face expressionless. After what felt like an eternity, the path opened up into a small clearing, and I stopped the car. This is far enough, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I looked around, confused. We were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by trees on all sides. Are you sure? There's nothing here. She turned to face me, her eyes hollow, dark. Thank you for the ride. With that, she opened the door and stepped out, disappearing into the shadows without another word. I waited, hoping she'd come back, but after a few minutes, I realized she was gone. The clearing was empty, silent, save for the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. Feeling a chill of fear settling into my bones, I turned the car around and headed back the way we'd come. But as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her face staring back at me. But there was nothing there. Just darkness. When I finally reached the main road, I breathed a sigh of relief, the tension slowly melting away. I told myself it was just a strange encounter, that I'd probably imagine half of it. But as I drove, something caught my eye. A flash of movement on the side of the road. There, standing just beyond the reach of my headlights, was the same young woman. Her dark hair and old-fashioned dress, unmistakable. She stared at me, her face expressionless, as I sped past, heart pounding in my chest. I didn't dare stop or look back. I kept driving, praying I'd make it home without seeing her again. By the time I reached my apartment, dawn was beginning to break, casting a pale light over the city. I parked and stumbled inside, exhausted but too wired to sleep. I sat on the couch, trying to make sense of what had happened, but the memory of her hollow eyes haunted me. For weeks afterward, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still out there, watching, waiting. I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, shadows that lingered too long, and once I even heard a whisper, soft and distant, as if carried on the wind. Thank you for the ride. I tried to brush it off, to convince myself it was all just a dream or a trick of the mind. But then, one night, I found a photograph tucked under my windshield wiper. It was old, faded, and worn, but the image was clear. A young woman with dark hair and an old-fashioned dress, standing by the side of a road. The same road I'd driven that night, and beneath the photo, written in a shaky hand, were the words, "They never found the driver. I never drove that road again." It happened on a Tuesday night, somewhere on the back roads of Colorado. I was about 3 hours out from home, and the only company I had was the low hum of my old sedan and the occasional animal darting across the highway. I'd been visiting family in a small town called Rangeley, and as usual, I'd left late, thinking I'd enjoy the quiet of the nighttime drive back to Denver. I was wrong. That night, it felt like the road itself was watching me. The trip was familiar. I'd made it many times before. The route twisted through forests, climbed into the foothills, and then flattened out for the long haul back to the city. The road stretched endlessly ahead, illuminated only by my high beams, slicing through the darkness, casting eerie shadows that looked like they could jump out and grab me at any second. 2 hours in, I was somewhere between tired and half asleep, cruising a little above the speed limit, when I noticed a faint light flickering in my rearview mirror. I squinted, trying to make it out. It wasn't a vehicle. There were no headlights, just a pulsing glow, faint and distant. At first, I thought it was a trick of the mind or a reflection, so I blinked hard and glanced back. But the light was still there, flickering and shifting, like a small flame dancing in the darkness. I tried to ignore it, but every few seconds, it would flicker again, taunting me. My hands tightened on the wheel as I took a deep breath, convincing myself it was nothing. But then the light grew brighter, moving closer, until I could no longer ignore it. I glanced back again, but this time, I couldn't look away. The glow was now a steady, pulsing light that seemed to hover right at the edge of my back seat. I slowed down, hoping maybe it would disappear if I pulled over, but as I eased off the gas, the light seemed to follow my every move. It was as if it was tethered to me, bound to the rhythm of my driving. A chill ran down my spine, and my heartbeat quickened. I was miles away from any town, alone on an empty road with no cell service. If anything happened, I was on my own. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was in the car with me. I glanced over my shoulder, but the back seat was empty, just shadows and the flickering glow that now looked almost like a figure, hunched and still, staring back at me. The faint outline of a face seemed to form in the light, with hollow, empty eyes fixed in my direction. Every instinct in my body screamed for me to keep driving, to avoid looking in the mirror. But curiosity, and a twisted kind of fear, kept my eyes glued to it. Then, without warning, the figure shifted, leaning closer as if it were trying to get a better look at me. I could see a faint outline of hands pressed against the back of my seat, skeletal and thin. The air in the car turned icy, and I could feel its breath on the back of my neck. I didn't dare move, barely even breathing, afraid that even the slightest motion would provoke it. After a few tense moments, I forced myself to look away, focusing on the road ahead. My fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly they ached. I took deep breaths, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I knew it was real. As I sped up, the figure in the mirror faded, shrinking back into the shadows. but the air in the car remained cold, thick with an overwhelming sense of dread. I didn't dare slow down, didn't dare risk it coming closer again. I kept my eyes trained on the road, silently begging to see the familiar glow of a town up ahead. Anything to break the suffocating darkness. Minutes passed, maybe hours. It was hard to tell. But eventually, the headlights of a semi-truck appeared in the distance, coming toward me. Relief washed over me as I slowed down, waving to the trucker as he passed, but he didn't respond. Instead, his face twisted into a look of horror, his eyes widening as he looked over my shoulder, through my rear window. In that split second, I knew he saw it too. As the truck's taillights faded, I tried to shake off the sinking feeling in my stomach. I had to keep driving, had to get out of there. But just as I was about to press down on the gas, the flickering light appeared again, stronger, closer than before. I could see the outline of a figure, hunched and twisted, its face obscured by shadows. Panicked, I slammed on the gas, speeding down the road as fast as my car would allow. The light grew fainter, and for a moment, I thought I'd lost it. But then, a voice, soft, whispery, like a gust of wind, filled the car, barely audible, but unmistakable. "Help me." The words were desperate, pleading, filled with a sorrow that cut straight through me. I glanced back, feeling a pang of sympathy mixed with terror. The figure was closer now, its face half visible, a woman with hollow eyes and a mouth twisted in anguish. She reached out, pressing her ghostly hand against the back of my seat, her fingers curling around the edges as if to anchor herself. "Help me," she whispered again, her voice trembling. I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel tighter. I wanted to help, but I was terrified, paralyzed by the thought of what she might do if I stopped. She seemed to sense my fear, and her expression softened, her eyes pleading with me. "Please, don't leave me here." The road stretched on endlessly, the darkness pressing in on all sides. I was trapped, unable to stop, unable to escape her. Her voice grew louder, filling the car, each word laced with desperation. "They left me here. Don't leave me too." My heart pounded in my chest as I fought the urge to look at her, to acknowledge her fully. I'd heard stories of ghostly hitchhikers, spirits trapped on the road, doomed to wander forever. But I'd never believed them, until now. I closed my eyes for a split second, whispering a silent prayer, hoping she'd go away. But when I opened them, she was still there, her face inches from mine, her hollow eyes filled with sorrow and rage. "Help me," she whispered, her voice echoing in my ears. I couldn't take it anymore. My hands shaking, I reached for the rearview mirror and tilted it upward, away from her gaze. But the moment I did, the temperature in the car plummeted, and the lights began to flicker. She was angry. The car shuddered as if something was clawing at it, trying to get in. Her voice grew louder, filling my head, drowning out everything else. "Help me!" Desperate, I pressed down on the gas, pushing the car to its limits. The engine roared as I sped down the road, the darkness blurring around me. But no matter how fast I went, her voice echoed in my ears, relentless. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The car was silent, the air still, the temperature slowly warming back up. I glanced around, my heart still racing, but the figure was gone. The flickering light had vanished, leaving me alone on the road. I drove the rest of the way in a daze, my mind racing, my body numb. By the time I reached the city limits, dawn was breaking, casting a soft glow over the buildings. I pulled over, sitting in my car, trying to process what had happened, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the memory of her voice, her hollow eyes, her desperate plea. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep, haunted by the sound of her whisper, the feel of her icy breath on my neck. I avoided that road, taking longer routes just to avoid passing through the area again. But every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of a flickering light in my rearview mirror, a reminder that she was still out there, waiting, pleading. And I knew, deep down, that she would never let me forget. Driving late at night has always given me an eerie kind of calm. The empty roads, the darkness, the solitude, it all creates this strange bubble, separating you from reality. But one night changed all of that. Now, the thought of driving after dark fills me with a dread I can't shake. It was just past midnight, and I was heading back to Salt Lake City from a business trip in Nevada. The drive was long and flat, cutting through miles of desert. I'd taken this route several times before, but that night, something felt off. The moon was full, casting an otherworldly glow over the barren landscape. Shadows stretched out along the road, twisting and bending in the car's headlights. It was beautiful, but haunting. About an hour into the drive, I noticed my gas gauge was lower than I remembered. I'd filled up before leaving, but somehow, the needle was creeping toward empty. I scanned the road ahead, hoping for a gas station, but the stretch of highway was desolate. Finally, a dim light appeared in the distance, a gas station in the middle of nowhere, its neon sign flickering like it was on its last leg. Relieved, I pulled in. The place looked abandoned, though a single bulb was still burning under the overhang. The gas station looked like it hadn't seen a customer in years. Rusted pumps, broken windows, dust coating everything. I shivered, feeling suddenly exposed under the dim light. I got out of the car and tried the pump, but it was dead. I cursed under my breath, realizing I'd have to go inside to pay. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and the smell of stale air and gasoline filled my nose. The store was dark except for a small lamp on the counter. Behind it sat an old man with a wrinkled face and piercing eyes that seemed to study me as I approached. "Evening," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Need gas?" "Yeah," I replied, trying to sound casual, though something about him made my skin crawl. He stared at me for a moment, before nodding slowly, his gaze never leaving mine. He got up, moving with a strange stiffness, and grabbed a set of keys. "Follow me," he said, leading me toward the back of the store. I glanced around, noting the dusty shelves and the old faded photographs that lined the walls. They were black and white, showing the gas station and the empty highway over the decades. Oddly enough, the station looked the same in each photo, unchanged by time. The old man led me through a door at the back and down a narrow hallway. The air grew colder with each step, and an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. The hallway ended at another door, and the man turned to me with an odd expression. "Just go through here," he said, his voice hollow. I hesitated. "Are you sure this leads to the pumps?" He didn't answer, just nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on me with that same unsettling intensity. Against my better judgment, I pushed the door open, stepping into darkness. The door clicked shut behind me, and I spun around, only to find that the man was gone. The hallway was gone. Instead, I was standing in what looked like a storage room. Rows of shelves lined the walls, each filled with cans of motor oil, dusty tools, and other items that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. I walked to the other side of the room, hoping for another exit, but the walls were solid. Panic began to bubble up as I realized I was trapped. I turned back toward the door, but when I tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. I pounded on it, calling out, but my voice echoed uselessly in the darkness. Then, the lights flickered on, casting a sickly yellow glow over the room. I took a step back, heart pounding, as I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Hanging on the walls were dozens of photographs, similar to the ones in the main store, but these were different. They showed the gas station, yes, but each one had a car parked out front, a car that looked newer than the others, as if each photograph had been taken decades apart. And in each photo was a person, a driver, standing by the pump. In the last photo, my car was parked out front, and I was in the frame, standing by the pump. My blood ran cold as I stared at the image. The scene was identical to the one outside, down to the flickering neon sign and the moonlight casting shadows on the ground. But there was something wrong with my reflection in the photo. My face looked distorted, almost like it was melting. My eyes empty hollows, my mouth twisted into a silent scream. I stumbled back, knocking over a can of oil as I did. The sound echoed through the room, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I needed to get out of there. I tried the door again, pulling and pounding until my hands were raw, but it still wouldn't open. Suddenly, I heard footsteps, slow and heavy, echoing from somewhere nearby. They grew louder, closer, until they stopped just outside the door. I held my breath, straining to listen. The doorknob rattled, and I took a step back, pressing myself against the wall as it slowly turned. The door creaked open, revealing the same old man from the counter, his face obscured in shadow. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, his voice dripping with a kind of malice that sent chills down my spine. I tried to speak, to explain, to ask him what was happening, but the words caught in my throat. He stepped into the room, his eyes fixed on me, and I felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread. "Come with me," he said, motioning for me to follow. I didn't want to, but something compelled me to move, my legs carrying me forward against my will. He led me back down the hallway, the walls seeming to close in around us. When we reached the end, he stopped, turning to me with a smile that was anything but friendly. "You're not the first, you know," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "And you won't be the last." Before I could react, he reached out, grabbing my arm with a grip stronger than I would have expected from someone his age. He pulled me toward the door, and I tried to resist, but it was like my body was moving on its own, powerless against his pull. He shoved me through the door, and I stumbled forward, blinking against the sudden brightness. I was back outside, standing by my car. The gas station was exactly as I'd left it, the neon sign flickering, the desert stretching out on either side. I spun around, looking for the old man, but he was gone. The gas station was empty, silent, as if I'd been the only one there. I got into my car, my hands shaking as I turned the key. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out of the lot, speeding down the highway as fast as I dared. The night was quiet, the road empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, lurking just beyond the reach of my headlights. When I finally saw the lights of a diner up ahead, I pulled in, needing a moment to catch my breath. I parked, sitting in the car for a moment, trying to calm down. But when I glanced in the rearview mirror, my heart nearly stopped. In the back seat, staring back at me with hollow, empty eyes, was my own reflection, distorted and twisted, just like the photograph. I spun around, but the seat was empty. I was alone. I stumbled out of the car and into the diner, my legs barely supporting me. The place was empty except for the waitress behind the counter, who looked at me with a mixture of concern and curiosity. Long night? She asked, her voice warm and familiar. I nodded, still shaken, and ordered a coffee. As I waited, I glanced around the diner, trying to ground myself. But then, my eyes landed on a bulletin board near the entrance, covered in old photos of missing people. My stomach dropped as I recognized several faces, drivers, all of them, standing by a gas pump, their expressions frozen in terror. I stumbled back, my mind racing. The waitress noticed, her expression shifting to one of sympathy. "Those poor folks," she said, shaking her head, "went missing around these parts. They say there's a gas station out on Highway 50 where drivers disappear. They call it the last stop." I barely heard her. My mind was reeling, my heart pounding in my chest. I paid for the coffee and left, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. When I got back to my car, I avoided looking in the rearview mirror, terrified of what I might see. To this day, I don't know what happened at that gas station, whether it was a trick of the mind or something else entirely. But I never take that route at night anymore. And every time I catch my reflection in the mirror, I half expect to see those hollow eyes staring back at me, a reminder of the night I almost became one of them. The last stop, that's what they call it. And if you ever find yourself out on that lonely stretch of Highway 50 at night, I suggest you keep driving. Don't stop, no matter what. Because if you do, you might just find yourself trapped in that photo, another lost soul in the desert, waiting for the next driver to come along. It was one of those nights where everything feels a bit surreal, so quiet and dark that the world around you seems to slip away. I was driving across New Mexico, taking the long route back to my hometown in Arizona after a weekend camping trip with some old friends. We'd parted ways, just as the sun was setting, each of us heading off in different directions. I was looking forward to the drive alone, the peace and quiet after 2 days of non-stop laughter, stories, and the noisy crackling of campfires. I never could have imagined that what lay ahead would be a memory I'd wish I could forget. The highway was empty, stretching for miles in both directions. Occasionally, I'd see the faint lights of a distant ranch or the dull glow of a truck stop off in the distance. But mostly, it was just me, the open road, and the night. The rhythm of the drive, the hum of the engine, and the darkness pressing in on me all felt strangely calming. My phone had lost service hours ago, so I turned on the radio, hoping to catch some music to break the silence. Instead, I found static, punctuated by snippets of faint voices fading in and out. After about an hour, a distant sign lit up in my headlights. Route 666. A chill ran down my spine. Route 666 was a legend among travelers, a stretch of road some called the Devil's Highway. Rumors swirled around it, stories of cars that vanished without a trace, strange sightings, people hearing voices in their heads. I'd always laughed it off as local legend, but tonight, alone in the darkness, the name took on a new weight. I could have turned around, taken another route, but the detour would have cost me hours, and I was tired, so I pressed on, reassuring myself that stories were just stories. About 20 minutes after passing that sign, I noticed something odd. My headlights started to dim, flickering in a way I hadn't seen before. I tapped the dashboard, hoping it was just a glitch, but the lights continued to fade in and out, casting shadows that danced across the road. It felt like the darkness was closing in, swallowing the light bit by bit. Then, I heard it, a faint whisper, soft, just at the edge of hearing, as if someone was speaking directly into my ear. "Turn back." I shivered, glancing around, but I was alone. The whisper faded, leaving me with nothing but the static hum of the radio. But as I looked back at the road, I saw something up ahead. A figure, standing in the middle of the lane, illuminated briefly by my weakening headlights. I slammed on the brakes, my heart racing as I came to a stop, just a few feet in front of the figure. They didn't move, didn't react, just stood there, their face obscured by shadows, their body still. I squinted, trying to make out any details, but it was hard to see in the dim light. All I could tell was that it was a man, tall and thin, his head slightly tilted as if he was watching me. I honked, hoping he'd step aside, but he didn't budge. Instead, he lifted a hand, pointing down the road, his arm moving in slow, deliberate motions. Then, without a sound, he stepped back, fading into the shadows, as if he'd never been there. I hesitated, wondering if I should turn around, go back the way I'd come. But something compelled me to keep going, a strange pull that I couldn't explain. I took a deep breath and eased my foot off the brake, moving forward slowly, scanning the road for any sign of him. But the figure was gone, vanished into the night. I continued driving, the darkness pressing in closer than before. My headlights were barely working now, and the static on the radio was growing louder, filling the car with a relentless, grating noise. I reached over to turn it off, but the knob wouldn't budge. It was like the radio had a mind of its own, refusing to let me find silence. Then, the whispers returned, louder this time. They sounded like multiple voices, overlapping, all speaking at once. I couldn't make out any words, but the tone was unmistakable, urgent, almost pleading. My hands gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles white as I tried to block out the sounds. Just as I was about to lose my nerve and turn back, I saw another sign ahead, the reflective paint glinting in my dim headlights. As I got closer, I could read it. Welcome to Hell's Crossroads. Population 0. I laughed nervously, trying to shake off the creeping sense of dread. It was probably just an old abandoned town with a grim sense of humor. Still, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. The road began to curve, leading me deeper into the hills, and the darkness seemed to grow thicker with every mile. Suddenly, my headlights blinked out completely, plunging me into total darkness. I cursed, frantically flipping the switch on and off, but nothing happened. The engine sputtered, and then, to my horror, it died, leaving me stranded in the middle of nowhere. I sat there, breathing heavily, as the silence wrapped around me like a suffocating blanket. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move in the rearview mirror. My heart pounded as I turned, but there was nothing there, just shadows dancing in the moonlight. That's when I heard the footsteps, slow and steady, coming from somewhere outside the car. They grew louder, closer, until they were right next to my door. I held my breath, terrified to move, as the footsteps stopped. Silence filled the car, thick and oppressive. And then, I heard it. The faint sound of tapping on my window. Soft, deliberate. I didn't dare look, my whole body frozen with fear. But the tapping continued, growing louder, more insistent, until it was pounding, rattling the window. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it would stop, that it was all some sort of nightmare. But when I opened my eyes, I saw a face pressed against the glass, grinning at me with a twisted, unnatural smile. The face was pale, almost ghostly, with hollow eyes that seemed to see straight through me. It mouthed something, but I couldn't make out the words. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished, leaving only a faint handprint smeared across the glass. I fumbled for my keys, desperate to start the car. but my hands were shaking too much to get a grip. Finally, the engine roared to life, and my headlights flickered back on. I slammed the car into drive and sped off, not daring to look back. As I drove, I noticed something strange. The road was different, unfamiliar. The trees seemed to close in, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The whispers returned, louder, filling the car with a chorus of voices that sounded like they were coming from just behind me. Then, up ahead, I saw another sign. Dead end. I tried to turn around, but the road was narrow, with steep drop-offs on either side. I had no choice but to keep going, hoping that I'd find a way out. But as I rounded the bend, I saw it. The figure from before, standing in the middle of the road, his hand still pointing forward. I slammed on the brakes again, skidding to a halt. This time, the figure moved, walking slowly toward the car. I locked the doors, but it didn't seem to matter. He stopped just outside my window, his face barely visible in the faint glow of the headlights. He lifted his hand, pressing it against the glass, and whispered, "You should have turned back." My blood ran cold as he disappeared once again, leaving me alone in the darkness. I tried to reverse, but the road was gone, replaced by thick, impenetrable woods. There was no way out. I sat there, trapped, as the whispers grew louder, filling the car with a relentless, maddening chorus. And then, just as I thought I couldn't take it anymore, everything went silent. The radio went dead, the headlights flickered out, and I was left alone in the dark. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen, too scared to move. Eventually, the sun began to rise, casting a faint light over the road. I started the car, half expecting it to refuse, but it roared to life. The whispers were gone, the road was clear, and the figure had vanished. I drove for hours, refusing to stop, until I reached the first town I saw. When I finally pulled into a gas station, I asked the attendant if he knew anything about Route 666. He looked at me, his expression darkening. "People say it's cursed," he said, his voice low. "Travelers go missing, cars break down, and sometimes folks say they see things that aren't supposed to be there." I didn't tell him what I'd seen. I didn't want to relive it. I filled up the tank, paid, and left, vowing never to drive that route again. To this day, I don't know what happened that night. Maybe it was all in my head, a trick of the mind brought on by exhaustion. But every now and then, when I'm driving alone at night, I swear I hear whispers, faint and distant, reminding me of that cursed road. And when I glance in the rearview mirror, sometimes, just for a split second, I see him, the man with the hollow eyes and the twisted smile, standing there, pointing forward, guiding me back to the road to the end. There's something about driving alone at night that never sat right with me. It's that strange feeling of isolation, like you're in a world suspended between reality and a dream. I had always been one to avoid it if I could, but sometimes life doesn't give you much of a choice. That was the case that night. Just me, an empty road, and hours of dark highway stretching endlessly in front of me. I'd just finished a late shift and had hours of driving before reaching home. It was somewhere around 2 a.m, and I was on a rural stretch of highway in Tennessee, with hardly a streetlight to guide me. My phone had lost signal miles back, and I was too tired to bother with the radio, leaving me alone in the silence of the car's hum. Everything seemed to blend together in a hazy, almost hypnotic way, until something finally cut through my fatigue. Up ahead, just on the edge of my headlights, I noticed a figure standing by the side of the road. At first, I thought it was just an animal or a shadow playing tricks on me. But as I got closer, I could see it was a person. Someone standing on the shoulder, their back turned to the road, barely moving. They didn't seem to notice my car approaching, and something about their stillness made my stomach twist. I slowed down instinctively, rolling by at a cautious speed. The figure was wearing what looked like a long, dark coat, their shoulders hunched slightly forward. As my headlights swept over them, I got a better look at their face, and I felt my breath catch. Their face was pale, almost unnaturally so, with hollow eyes that stared straight ahead, fixed on something I couldn't see. They didn't look at me, didn't react to the car at all. I couldn't explain why, but every instinct in my body screamed at me to keep driving, not to stop, not to engage. I pressed down on the gas, feeling a chill spread through me as I left them behind, watching in my rearview mirror as they disappeared into the darkness. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself it was nothing. But a mile or two later, something strange happened. My headlights flickered, just a quick, subtle flash, like a glitch. Then they flickered again, this time lasting a few seconds longer. The road was so dark that even a brief loss of light plunged me into complete blackness, and it felt like the darkness was pressing in on me, suffocating. "Come on, don't do this now," I muttered, trying to steady my nerves. But then, the lights flickered out completely. Panic bubbled up as I found myself engulfed in pitch-black silence. I stomped on the brake, slowing to a stop, my heart pounding. I fiddled with the switch, desperate to bring the lights back, when something caught my eye. Movement in the mirror. It was just a glimpse at first, a quick flash in the darkness, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. There was someone standing behind my car, barely illuminated by the fading glow of my taillights. It was the same figure, the one I'd passed just minutes earlier, their face tilted slightly to the side, as if they were watching me. I froze, my hands gripping the wheel, my eyes glued to the mirror. The figure didn't move, just stood there, staring. Then, as quickly as they'd appeared, they were gone, vanished into the darkness, leaving me alone with my racing heartbeat and the silence pressing in around me. I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks, but the sense of unease only grew stronger. I needed to get out of there. The lights came back on, and I took it as a sign, wasting no time as I floored the gas and sped down the road, desperate to put as much distance as possible between me and whatever that was. But as I drove, the feeling that I wasn't alone crept back over me. I kept glancing in the mirror, half expecting to see that face staring back at me, half expecting them to be sitting in my back seat. I started seeing shadows along the roadside, shapes that seemed to shift and move, slipping out of sight whenever I tried to focus on them. It was like the darkness itself was alive, watching me, closing in. A little while later, I saw headlights coming toward me, a lone car, heading in the opposite direction. Relief flooded over me at the sight of another person, another witness to whatever was happening. I slowed down, intending to flash my lights or wave them down, but as the car got closer, I noticed something strange. The driver's face was pale and blank, their eyes staring straight ahead, just like the figure I'd seen on the roadside. Their expression was empty, almost inhuman, as if they were in some kind of trance. The car passed me without slowing, and I watched it fade into the darkness, feeling a chill crawl up my spine. The road ahead stretched on, long and empty, and the fear that I was completely alone settled over me like a weight. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard, realizing with a start that hours had passed, even though I'd only been driving for what felt like a short while. It was almost 4 in the morning, but the night seemed endless. Then, out of nowhere, the lights flickered again, and my engine started to sputter. I cursed, gripping the wheel as the car shuddered, then died completely, leaving me stranded in the middle of nowhere. I tried the ignition, but it wouldn't turn over. The silence was deafening, broken only by the soft rustling of the wind outside. I sat there, unsure of what to do, when I noticed something up ahead. In the faint moonlight, I could just make out the outline of a small, run-down gas station, its sign flickering weakly. It seemed to be my only option, so I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and got out of the car, keeping an eye on the shadows as I made my way toward the building. The station was eerily quiet, the windows dark and empty. I pushed open the door, wincing as it creaked loudly, and stepped inside. The air was stale, filled with the scent of dust and gasoline. Rows of shelves stood empty, as if the place had been abandoned for years. I called out, hoping for a response, but my voice echoed back to me, unanswered. Then, just as I was about to leave, I heard it, a faint whisper, coming from somewhere in the darkness. I froze, my heart pounding as I strained to listen. The voice was soft, almost pleading, and it sounded familiar. "Help me." I turned, shining my flashlight around, but there was no one there. The voice repeated, louder this time, filling the empty space around me. It echoed, bouncing off the walls, overlapping until it became a chorus of whispers, each one calling out, pleading, begging for help. I stumbled back, my flashlight shaking as I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut, trapping me inside. Panic surged as I pounded on the door, desperate to get out, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder, filling my head, drowning out my thoughts. Then, I saw them. Faces, dozens of them, appearing in the darkness. They were faint, like shadows, but I could see their hollow eyes, their mouths open in silent screams. Each face was twisted in agony, staring at me as if they could see straight into my soul. I backed away, pressing myself against the door, but the faces only grew closer, surrounding me, closing in. The whispers turned into screams, deafening, echoing through the empty station. Just as I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the door flew open, and I stumbled outside, gasping for air. The night was silent again, the faces and voices gone as if they'd never been there. I didn't waste any time, sprinting back to my car, praying it would start. To my relief, the engine roared to life on the first try, and I tore out of there, not daring to look back. The road was empty, the darkness pressing in on me from all sides, but I kept my eyes forward, focused on getting as far away as possible. I don't remember much of the drive after that. It felt like I was in a daze, the memories slipping away even as I clung to them. By the time I reached home, the first light of dawn was breaking, casting a faint glow over the familiar streets. But the relief I felt was short-lived. As I parked the car and glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw it. The figure from the road, standing in the distance, watching me with those empty, hollow eyes. And just for a second, I thought I saw others behind them, shadows stretching out across the street, fading into the morning light. I've told myself it was all in my head, a trick of exhaustion and fear. But every time I drive at night, I feel it. The weight of unseen eyes, the whispers in the back of my mind, calling out, waiting for me to come back. And in my heart, I know one thing for certain. Somewhere out there, on that lonely stretch of highway, they're still waiting, shadows on the road, watching every driver who dares to pass through their domain. I've always been a night owl. There's something about the quiet, the way everything slows down after midnight, that makes me feel calm. Maybe it's because most people are asleep, and there's a certain thrill in knowing you're one of the few who's awake, aware, when the world is so still. That's why I didn't think twice about driving cross-country alone at night after a week-long work conference in Austin. I'd driven long distances before. I knew the routes well enough. But I wish, more than anything, I'd taken an earlier flight instead of choosing to drive alone that night. I set out around midnight, figuring the roads would be clear and that I'd get home to Nevada just as the sun came up. The route was mostly deserted highways and small, forgotten towns. My GPS was locked onto my destination, but there was almost no need for it. I knew the drive by heart. About 3 hours in, somewhere near the Texas-New Mexico border, I realized I needed gas. The tank was low, but there was supposed to be a 24-hour station along this stretch of road. After a few minutes, I saw the neon glow of a sign up ahead. Easy stop. The place looked abandoned, its lights flickering, casting an eerie glow over the empty lot. But I was too low on gas to pass it up. As I pulled in, I noticed another car parked by the single old-fashioned pump. It was a rusted blue pickup truck with no one inside. The silence in that lot was overwhelming, pressing down on me, heavy and cold. I almost felt like I was intruding on something, stepping into someone else's territory. I got out and started pumping gas, my eyes shifting constantly to the empty truck. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. A shiver ran down my spine, and I kept glancing over my shoulder. But there was nothing, no one, just the sound of gas filling the tank and the faint hum of the neon lights overhead. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a whisper. "Hey, need any help?" I jumped, spinning around, but I didn't see anyone. The sound had come from behind me, but there was only the open lot, stretching into the dark. I shook it off, convincing myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the night. I finished filling up, paid at the pump, and climbed back into my car, eager to get back on the road. But as I was about to pull out of the lot, I noticed something odd. In my rearview mirror, the blue pickup truck was gone. Just gone. It hadn't started, hadn't driven away. It was just no longer there. I stared into the darkness, trying to figure out where it could have gone. But the empty lot was silent and still. I felt a prickle of fear, but I told myself it was nothing, just nerves. I'd been awake for hours, after all. So, I took a deep breath and got back on the road, the gas station fading into the distance. But the unease lingered, sitting heavy in my chest as I drove on. Every so often, I'd glance into my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that old truck following me. But each time, there was nothing, just the empty road, stretching endlessly behind me. About an hour later, I noticed something strange. My GPS, which had been navigating smoothly, suddenly went dark, the screen glitching and flickering with static before finally going blank. I tapped it, hoping it was just a temporary issue, but the screen stayed dark. I checked my phone, but it had lost signal miles ago. Frustrated, I tossed it onto the passenger seat and focused on the road, figuring I'd rely on memory to guide me the rest of the way. But after another mile or so, I started seeing signs that didn't make sense. The names of towns I didn't recognize, road markers that didn't fit the route. It was like I was somewhere completely different, a place I'd never driven through before. The road itself felt unfamiliar, winding in ways it shouldn't, leading me deeper into the desert. That's when I saw the first sign. It was an old, rusted thing, barely readable in the dim light of my headlights. The letters were faded, but I could just make them out. Last turn, with an arrow pointing down a narrow gravel road that veered off from the highway. It didn't make sense. There was no road like that on the map. But something about the sign drew me in, like a pull that I couldn't resist. I slowed down, considering my options. The highway stretched on in both directions, empty and unchanging. But something in me felt compelled to take that turn. It was as if the sign was waiting for me, as if it knew I'd be here. I tried to shake off the feeling, chalking it up to my tired mind playing tricks, but the pull was too strong. Before I knew it, I was turning onto the gravel road, my headlights casting long shadows as I drove deeper into the unknown. The road was rough, jostling my car as I made my way down the narrow path. The further I went, the darker it seemed to get, until it felt like the night itself was closing in around me. The air grew colder, and an unsettling silence settled over everything, like the world had fallen away, leaving just me and the road. After a few minutes, I saw something up ahead, a figure standing by the side of the road. My heart skipped a beat as I slowed down, the headlights illuminating a woman dressed in a long, tattered dress, her hair hanging over her face. She stood perfectly still, facing away from me, her head tilted slightly, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. I should have driven past her. Every instinct screamed at me to keep going, not to stop. But some twisted sense of curiosity made me slow down, rolling to a stop just a few feet away. I lowered the window, leaning out to call to her. "Do you need help?" I asked, my voice sounding small in the vast silence. She didn't respond, didn't move. I sat there, waiting, watching her for any sign of movement. Then, slowly, she lifted her head, turning just enough for me to catch a glimpse of her face. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, her eyes dark and hollow. She stared at me with an expression that was neither angry nor sad, but something else, something I couldn't quite place. A look of longing, of sorrow, as if she were looking right through me. And then, she was gone. 1 second she was there, and the next, the road was empty. I blinked, my mind struggling to process what I'd just seen. I felt a chill run through me, a deep, bone-cold fear that rooted me to my seat. But I couldn't stay there. I started the car, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel, and drove off, hoping to put as much distance as possible between myself and that spot. But as I drove, the road began to change. It was subtle at first. The gravel seemed darker, the trees on either side taller, their branches twisting into unnatural shapes. The air grew colder, and a heavy fog started to settle over everything, thick and impenetrable. I could barely see a few feet in front of me, but I didn't dare stop, too afraid of what might be lurking in the darkness. Then, out of nowhere, the fog lifted, and I found myself in a strange, desolate landscape. The road was cracked and broken, weeds sprouting up through the asphalt. The sky was a sickly shade of gray, and the air smelled of damp earth and decay. It was like I'd driven straight into another world, a place where time itself had stopped. I kept driving, my heart pounding as I scanned the road for any sign of an exit, a way out. But the further I went, the more I felt trapped, like the road was leading me in circles, pulling me deeper into this twisted, nightmarish place. Then, in the distance, I saw it. The blue pickup truck, parked in the middle of the road, blocking my path. My headlights illuminated it as I approached, and I felt my stomach drop. The truck was empty, but there was something in the passenger seat. A worn, faded dress, tattered and torn, exactly like the one the woman had been wearing. The door was slightly ajar, swinging slowly in the breeze, and I could see faint handprints on the window, smeared and ghostly. I backed up, my heart racing, ready to turn around. But when I glanced in my rearview mirror, my blood ran cold. There, standing in the middle of the road behind me, was the woman, her hollow eyes locked onto mine. She started walking toward the car, her steps slow and deliberate, her gaze unblinking. I threw the car into reverse, my tires skidding on the gravel as I sped backward, trying to escape. But no matter how fast I went, she kept pace, her figure growing closer, filling the mirror until her face was inches from the glass. And then, she was gone. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding as I looked around. The road was empty, the fog lifting, the landscape shifting back to normal. It was like nothing had happened, like I'd just imagined it all. But I knew better. I could feel her presence, lingering, watching, waiting. And as I drove away, putting as much distance as I could between myself and that cursed road, I knew I'd never forget the look in her eyes, the look that told me she wasn't done with me yet. I never thought I'd be one of those people who had a paranormal experience. I was always the skeptic, the one who shrugged off ghost stories as figments of tired minds or tricks of bad lighting. But that changed one cold October night last year on Highway 34, driving back from my cousin's wedding in Iowa. I'd been on the road for hours, and the only thing keeping me awake was a strong cup of black coffee and a series of podcasts that had started to feel repetitive. It was nearing 2 a.m, and I was the only car on the road. The surrounding farmland was pitch black, no lights from houses or gas stations for miles, just the glow of my headlights cutting a narrow path through the dark. I should have stopped at a motel, should have waited for morning to finish the drive home. But I was exhausted from a long weekend and just wanted to get back to familiar ground, to my own bed. The empty road lulled me into a sort of trance, and my mind wandered as I drove, my hands gripping the wheel out of habit. That's when I saw it. Up ahead, illuminated by my headlights, was a figure on the side of the road. It looked like a person, standing completely still in the darkness, barely within the beam of my headlights. At first, I thought it was just a mailbox or a road sign, maybe even an animal. But as I got closer, I could see the shape was distinctly human. A man, standing with his back to the road, his shoulders hunched, his head slightly bowed. I slowed down, curiosity overcoming my better judgment. It didn't make sense. What was someone doing out here, in the middle of nowhere, at this hour? My headlights swept over him as I drew closer, revealing more details. He was wearing what looked like a tattered jacket, and his hair was messy, falling over his face. He didn't turn to look at me, didn't acknowledge the car, just stood there, facing away, with his arms hanging limply at his sides. I had the strongest urge to keep driving, to put as much distance between myself and this stranger as possible. But something about the whole situation nagged at me. What if he was stranded? What if he needed help? Against my instincts, I slowed the car to a crawl and rolled down my window. "Hey," I called, my voice sounding strange and hollow in the open night air. "Do you need a ride? Are you all right?" For a few seconds, he didn't respond. He just stood there, motionless. Then slowly, he turned his head, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of his face in the edge of my headlights. His eyes were empty, hollow, like he was looking right through me. His face was pale, almost gray, with dark shadows under his eyes. He stared at me for a long, unsettling moment, and I felt an intense chill run down my spine, a gut-deep feeling of wrongness. The man didn't say anything. He just kept staring, his expression unreadable, like he was sizing me up or trying to remember something he'd forgotten long ago. I wanted to look away, but his gaze held me in place, my hand frozen on the gear shift. The silence stretched between us, heavy and unnerving, and I found myself unable to breathe properly. Suddenly, he took a step toward the car, and I snapped out of my trance. I rolled the window up, my heart racing, and hit the gas. The tires screeched as I sped off, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. He was still standing there, watching as I drove away, his figure disappearing into the darkness as my taillights faded into the distance. I kept glancing in the mirror, half expecting him to appear in the back seat or see him running after the car. But the road was empty. Just me and the endless stretch of highway, the figure fading further and further behind. I tried to shake it off, to tell myself it was just a weird encounter with a random drifter. But the feeling of his stare lingered, making the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I felt like I couldn't escape that look, like he was still watching me somehow, his gaze following me down the empty road. About 15 minutes later, I thought I'd put enough distance between us that I could finally relax. But just as I started to feel a bit of relief, something caught my eye up ahead. My stomach dropped. Standing by the side of the road, right where my headlights would fall, was the same man. He was facing the road this time, waiting, his eyes fixed on me as I approached. The same empty, hollow stare, his head slightly tilted, his mouth curled in the faintest hint of a smile. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop a few yards away, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. There was no way, no possible way he could have gotten there before me. I'd been driving non-stop, the speedometer barely below 70 the whole time. I watched him, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps, my hands trembling on the wheel. He didn't move, just stood there, watching, waiting. I didn't wait to find out what he wanted. I floored the gas pedal, swerving around him and speeding off into the night, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. I kept driving, kept glancing in the rear view, half expecting to see him standing in the middle of the road, or worse, in the back seat. After a few minutes, I forced myself to look forward, to focus on the road. But my nerves were shot, and every shadow, every flicker of movement at the edge of my vision made me jump. I was wound so tight that I almost didn't notice the faint smell that had started to fill the car, a smell of damp earth and something else, something sour and metallic, like rusted metal. I tried to ignore it, rolling down the windows to let in the fresh air. But the smell only grew stronger, filling the car, making it hard to breathe. My chest felt tight, my skin prickling as if something, or someone, was watching me, even though I was alone. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw the glow of a gas station up ahead. I pulled in, barely able to keep my hands steady as I parked by the pump. The station was empty, just rows of dark pumps and a flickering sign casting a dim light over the lot. I killed the engine, breathing hard, trying to calm myself down. I sat there for a moment, gathering the courage to step out, to feel the solid ground under my feet. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, my blood ran cold. He was there, sitting in the back seat, his hollow eyes fixed on me, his face inches from mine. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember jumping out of the car or slamming the door. The next thing I knew, I was standing in the middle of the lot, staring at my car from a safe distance, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. There was no one in the car. The back seat was empty, as if he'd never been there. I didn't get back in. I left the car at the station, walked to the nearest town, and caught a ride home the next day. My friends laughed when I told them about it, chalking it up to exhaustion or too much coffee. But I know what I saw. I can still see his eyes in my mind, that empty, hollow glare, the way he looked through me, as if he knew something I didn't. It's been months, and I haven't driven at night since. But every so often, when I'm alone, I'll catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, or feel that same chill run down my spine, like I'm being watched. And I know he's still out there, waiting, watching, for the next person foolish enough to pick him up. It was a cool autumn night when I found myself driving back home from a friend's wedding. The celebration had been long and filled with laughter, but as the clock struck midnight, I knew I had a long drive ahead of me. I had opted to leave early to avoid any late-night drunk drivers on the road, thinking I was being smart. Little did I know that my choice would lead to something far more sinister. As I cruised down the dark highway, the landscape blurred past me. It was just me, the moonlight, and the occasional flicker of the radio. I felt a strange calm wash over me. The drive was familiar. I had made it countless times. Yet tonight, the emptiness of the road felt different, almost oppressive. About an hour in, I noticed my gas gauge was perilously close to empty. I hadn't passed a gas station for miles, and my heart sank at the thought of being stranded out in the middle of nowhere. Just as I began to feel anxious, I spotted a dim light in the distance. I squinted and saw the flickering sign of a small gas station. It seemed almost like a beacon of hope, glowing in the black abyss around me. As I pulled into the lot, I couldn't help but notice how quiet it was. The only sound was the crunch of gravel beneath my tires. The station itself was old and run down, with flickering fluorescent lights that hummed ominously. There were no other cars around, no sign of life. A chill ran down my spine as I stepped out of the car, the cold night air wrapping around me. I approached the pump and began filling my tank, glancing around nervously. Something felt off about this place. Just then, I heard a noise coming from the shadows behind the station, a low, rumbling growl that sent a shiver down my spine. I froze for a moment, debating whether to get back in my car or investigate. Curiosity got the better of me. I walked cautiously toward the sound, peering around the corner of the building. I half expected to see a stray dog or some other animal. Instead, I saw nothing but the darkened rear of the station and a dumpster overflowing with trash. I took a deep breath, chastising myself for being jumpy, and turned back to finish filling up my tank. As I was about to hop back in my car, I noticed something strange in my reflection on the gas station's glass door. It looked like a figure standing behind me. I whipped around, heart racing, but there was no one there. Just the empty lot and the dark trees swaying gently in the wind. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease that had settled over me. I finished fueling up, hopped in my car, and decided to head home. But as I pulled out of the lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced in the rearview mirror and felt my stomach drop. Standing by the side of the road, not far from where I had just been, was a woman. She was dressed in a long, flowing white dress that billowed in the wind. Her hair was dark and unkempt, framing a pale face that seemed almost ethereal in the moonlight. She stood there, her eyes fixed on me, a haunting expression on her face. I felt a chill sweep over me, and against my better judgment, I slowed down to get a better look. As I approached, the woman remained still, her gaze unwavering. I contemplated stopping to see if she needed help, but something deep down warned me against it. The air felt thick with tension, and I had the distinct feeling that this was not a woman in distress, but something far more unsettling. Before I could decide what to do, she took a step toward my car. I felt an icy fear grip me, and I hit the gas, speeding away without a second thought. I glanced in the mirror and saw her standing there, still watching, her white dress fluttering in the wind like a ghost. The further I drove, the more my heart raced. I wanted to put as much distance between us as possible. But as I drove, the night seemed to grow darker, the road more desolate. Shadows danced at the edges of my vision, and every creak of the car felt magnified in the silence. About 20 minutes later, I decided to pull over to regain my composure. I parked on the shoulder, taking deep breaths to calm my racing heart. But just as I was starting to relax, my headlights illuminated something in front of me. The woman was there again, standing directly in front of my car, blocking the road. This time, she was closer, and I could see her features clearly. Her eyes were wide and empty, almost hollow, and she wore an expression that seemed to plead for something, though I couldn't decipher what it was. Panic surged through me. I slammed the car into reverse and sped backward, barely keeping control of the vehicle as I fumbled for the gear shift. My heart raced as I glanced at the rearview mirror, but she was gone again. I quickly turned the car around and drove off into the night, shaking uncontrollably. The shadows seemed to close in around me, whispering secrets I couldn't understand. My mind raced with fear. The image of that woman seared into my memory. I drove for what felt like hours, never daring to look in the rearview mirror again. Every turn, every shadow made me jump, convinced that she would reappear. Finally, as dawn began to break, I pulled into a diner just off the highway, my heart still pounding. I stumbled inside, needing to collect my thoughts and shake off the night's events. As I ordered coffee, I couldn't help but notice the patrons staring at me, their eyes filled with concern. It wasn't until the waitress leaned in, lowering her voice, that I learned the truth. That stretch of road you were on, it's haunted, they say. A woman in white appears to drivers late at night, looking for something she lost, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I felt a chill run down my spine. I didn't need to hear more. I had seen her. She was real, and she had found me. From that night on, I avoided driving alone at night. The road was no longer familiar. It was a place filled with shadows and things that lurked just beyond the edge of the light. I still think about that woman sometimes, wondering what she wanted and why she chose to reveal herself to me. And every time I do, a sense of dread washes over me, a reminder that some roads should never be traveled alone. It was one of those nights when the world feels particularly eerie. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a pale light that filtered through the dense trees lining the winding back roads of my small town in rural Pennsylvania. I had just finished my shift at the local bar and was looking forward to the comfort of my own bed. The clock showed 2:00 a.m., and as I settled into my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The drive home was usually uneventful, but that night, the air felt thick with tension. I turned on the radio, hoping the familiar tunes would ease my nerves, but nothing could penetrate the silence of the empty roads. The deep shadows of the trees seemed to loom closer, swallowing the light from my headlights. I found myself jumping at every rustle of leaves and flicker of movement in my peripheral vision. About 10 minutes into the drive, I noticed a flickering light up ahead. As I approached, I realized it was a streetlight, dim and buzzing, illuminating a figure standing on the side of the road. I slowed down, trying to make out who it was. A man was standing there, his back turned to me, dressed in dark clothes, with his hands shoved deep into his pockets. My heart raced, and an instinctual urge to keep driving tugged at me. It was late, and I was alone. Something didn't feel right. But there was a nagging sense of curiosity, a pull that made me want to know more. I rolled down my window slightly, calling out, "Hey, do you need help?" He turned slowly, revealing a gaunt face, pale under the flickering light. His eyes were sunken, and for a moment, they seemed to bore right into my soul. "I'm just waiting for a ride," he said in a voice that was almost a whisper, barely carrying over the sound of my idling engine. I hesitated, glancing around the empty road. "Where are you headed?" He looked back down the road, then back at me, his expression unreadable. "Just a few miles down. I missed my bus." I felt a rush of empathy. I knew how lonely it could feel out here at night, but still, a voice in my head screamed for me to drive away. "It's late. Are you sure you don't want me to call someone?" He took a step closer, and I noticed the way his hands trembled slightly. "No, please. I just need a ride. I promise I won't cause any trouble." Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door. "All right, hop in." He slid into the passenger seat without another word. I didn't miss the way he glanced around the car, taking in the clutter of empty coffee cups and old receipts. "Thanks for stopping," he muttered, staring out the window. The car felt smaller with him inside, the air suddenly heavy. I turned the radio back on, hoping to fill the silence, but the music did little to ease my growing unease. The road stretched on, and I focused on the darkness ahead, trying to shake off the tension. "What's your name?" I finally asked, breaking the silence. "Ethan," he replied, his gaze still fixed outside. "Nice to meet you, Ethan. I'm Sarah," I said, attempting to keep the conversation light. "Yeah," he mumbled, his voice trailing off. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye, trying to decipher the emotion behind his hollow stare. "So, what were you doing out here so late?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "Just hanging out with friends. Things got weird, and I left. It's not really my scene anymore." I nodded, unsure of what to say next. The darkness outside felt oppressive, as if it was pressing in on us. Suddenly, my headlights caught something moving on the side of the road. I squinted, realizing it was a deer, frozen in place, staring at us with wide eyes. I slammed on the brakes, heart pounding, narrowly avoiding hitting it. Ethan let out a breath, his body tensing beside me. "That was close," he muttered. I nodded, my hands shaking slightly on the wheel. "Yeah, too close." After a moment of silence, I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the anxiety creeping into my bones. "So, where exactly are you headed? I don't want to keep you out here too long." He looked at me, and for the first time, I noticed a flicker of something dark in his eyes. "Just keep driving. I'll tell you when to stop." That statement sent a chill down my spine. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, a primal instinct screaming at me that I should have turned around the moment I saw him. But I kept driving, the road winding before us, illuminated only by the weak beam of my headlights. Minutes felt like hours as I navigated the quiet darkness. My thoughts raced, and I tried to engage Ethan in conversation, but he mostly stared out the window, lost in his own world. The atmosphere grew heavier with every passing mile, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Finally, the oppressive silence was broken by a low rumble of thunder in the distance. I looked up at the sky, dark clouds rolling in. "Looks like we might get some rain," I said, attempting to lighten the mood. "Yeah," Ethan replied, his tone flat. "It always rains at night." His words hung in the air like a threat. I wanted to ask him what he meant, but a knot formed in my stomach. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights behind us, but the road remained empty. As the rain began to fall, heavy droplets pattered against the windshield, obscuring my view. I turned on the wipers and concentrated on the road, the soft sound of the rain blending with the eerie silence. Suddenly, Ethan broke the tension. "Can you stop here?" he asked abruptly, pointing to a small dirt road leading into the woods. I hesitated, unsure if I should. "Isn't your place further down?" "I just need to grab something," he insisted, his voice tense. Against my better judgment, I pulled off the road, the tires crunching on the gravel. The trees loomed around us, blocking out the faint light from the road. I turned off the engine, the sudden silence deafening. "What do you need to get?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just a minute, I'll be right back," he replied, opening the door and stepping out into the rain. I watched him disappear into the darkness, anxiety flooding my mind. I glanced at my phone, but there was no signal. I felt trapped. The rain drummed heavily on the roof of the car, amplifying the unease I felt creeping in. Minutes passed, and Ethan didn't return. I glanced around, feeling more vulnerable by the second. I wanted to call out for him, but something held me back, an instinct telling me to stay quiet. Finally, I reached for the door handle, ready to get out and look for him, when I heard a soft sound, a rustling, like footsteps approaching the car. My heart raced, and I pressed my back against the seat, trying to keep calm. The passenger door creaked open, and I turned to see Ethan standing there, drenched, but looking oddly serene. "Sorry, I took longer than expected," he said, his voice calm, almost too calm. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Yeah, let's just go," he replied, sliding back into the passenger seat. I hesitated, feeling an urge to drive away, but I forced myself to start the engine. I pulled back onto the road, my heart pounding louder than the rain against the windshield. "Where to now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just keep driving," he said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. As I drove, the rain fell harder, and the darkness seemed to close in around us. I kept glancing at Ethan, who sat silently, staring ahead. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, and every instinct screamed at me to get away. Suddenly, he turned to me, his eyes piercing. "Do you believe in ghosts?" I was taken aback by the suddenness of the question. Not really. Why?" "Because I've seen one," he said, his voice low and serious. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "I was in a car accident a few years ago," he said, his gaze drifting. "I shouldn't have survived, but I did. Ever since that night, I've felt different." "What do you mean by different?" I pressed, a chill creeping down my spine. "I can see things, feel things, and sometimes I think they see me too," he said, his voice almost a whisper. Just then, I felt a sudden rush of cold air sweep through the car, and I glanced at the windows, fogging up instantly. My breath caught in my throat. The car felt suffocating, the air thick with tension. I forced myself to focus on the road, trying to ignore the creeping dread settling in my stomach. "Ethan, please, what do you mean by that?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. He didn't respond, his gaze locked ahead, his expression inscrutable. The rain pounded harder against the roof, and I felt the urge to scream. "Ethan, this isn't funny, just tell me what's going on." "I can feel them," he murmured, almost to himself. "They're all around us." Panic surged through me. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt on the slick road. "Get out!" I said, my voice trembling. "Sarah, please don't." But I didn't wait for him to finish. I flung open the door and bolted into the rain. I didn't care about the darkness or the danger of the woods surrounding me. I just needed to escape. I ran, my heart racing, slipping on the wet ground. I glanced back, seeing Ethan still seated in the car, his eyes locked on something I couldn't see. The air felt electric, charged with a force I couldn't comprehend. "Sarah, wait!" he called out, but I didn't stop. I ran deeper into the woods, branches scratching at my arms, the rain soaking me to the bone. I could hear him behind me, but I didn't look back. My instincts screamed at me to keep going, to get away from him, from whatever darkness surrounded us. Then, as I stumbled through the underbrush, I felt a hand on my shoulder, freezing me in place. I spun around, heart pounding, and found myself face to face with Ethan. "Please, you don't understand," he said, his expression pleading. "They're not all bad." I took a step back, my breath coming in quick gasps. "What are you talking about?" But before he could answer, I heard a noise. Whispers carried by the wind, swirling around us, wrapping around my mind like a vice. My vision blurred, and suddenly, I felt the weight of unseen eyes on me, watching, waiting. Ethan's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing. "You shouldn't have run. Now they'll know you're here." A scream clawed its way up my throat, and I turned to flee, but the forest was alive with movement, shadows darting between the trees. I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck, and knew that I was no longer alone. I ran, my heart pounding in my chest, branches clawing at my skin. I could hear Ethan calling after me, but I didn't look back. I sprinted deeper into the woods, the whispers growing louder, filling my mind with terror. The darkness seemed to close in, suffocating, and I tripped over a root, crashing to the ground. I scrambled to my feet, but it was too late. The shadows swarmed around me, and I felt their cold fingers brushing against my skin, pulling me down into the abyss. Suddenly, I awoke, gasping for breath, drenched in sweat. I was in my bed, the morning light streaming through the window. I shot up, my heart racing, the memories of the night flooding back. Had it all been a dream? Or had I really encountered something from beyond? I glanced at my phone, the time reading 8:00 a.m. I hurried to get dressed, feeling a sense of dread settle in my stomach. As I stepped outside, the world looked the same, but everything felt different. As I drove to work later that day, I found myself taking the same route, a sense of unease creeping back in. But when I reached the spot where I had picked up Ethan, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A makeshift memorial stood at the edge of the road, flowers and candles scattered on the ground. I parked the car, heart racing, and stepped out to get a closer look. The note attached to the flowers read, "In loving memory of Ethan Miller, who tragically lost his life here last year." A chill ran down my spine as the realization hit me. I had picked up a ghost, a lost soul searching for something. Perhaps redemption, perhaps just a way to feel alive again. I stumbled back to my car, shaken. I would never take that road home again, knowing that sometimes the darkness hides more than just the absence of light. It holds echoes of the past, waiting for the next unsuspecting driver to stumble upon its haunting embrace. I sat in my car, the engine running, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't articulate. I knew I would never forget that night. The rain, the whispers, and Ethan's haunting presence. It was a reminder that some roads are better left untraveled, and some encounters are best avoided, for the darkness that dwells within them may never let you go. It was a chilly November night, and I was driving back home from a late shift at the hospital. The roads were almost empty, lit only by the faint glow of the streetlights and my headlights cutting through the darkness. I always took the back roads, thinking they were safer and less likely to be patrolled by police. As I drove, the monotonous sound of my tires on the pavement and the soft hum of the engine were the only things keeping me company. About halfway home, I noticed something strange in my rearview mirror. A faint light flickered behind me, growing brighter as it closed the distance. I glanced back, expecting to see a car, but instead, I saw a figure standing on the roadside, illuminated by my headlights. My heart sank. It was a woman, dressed in a flowing white gown, her hair tangled and wet, as if she had just emerged from a rainstorm. She looked ethereal, almost ghostly, standing there in stark contrast to the dark night. As I approached, I could see that her face was pale and gaunt, with eyes that seemed to bore into me with a mixture of sadness and urgency. I slowed down, my instincts screaming at me to keep driving, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she needed help. I rolled down my window, feeling a chill wash over me as I called out, "Do you need a ride?" To my surprise, she nodded, moving closer to the car. "Please, I just want to go home," she said, her voice barely a whisper, but filled with desperation. My gut told me to refuse, but something compelled me to let her in. "All right, get in," I said, unlocking the door. She slipped into the passenger seat, and I immediately felt the temperature drop. "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation light. "Just down the road," she replied, her gaze fixed on the windshield, as if she were looking past the glass and into another world. As I drove, I could feel her presence beside me. She seemed almost transparent in the dim light, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her dress. The silence hung heavy in the air, and I found myself stealing glances at her, trying to make sense of the situation. "What's your name?" I asked, breaking the tension. "Emily," she replied softly, her voice a mere breath. "I was at a party, and things went wrong. I just need to get home." A chill ran down my spine as I tried to focus on the road. "What do you mean things went wrong?" I pressed, my curiosity getting the better of me. "I can't explain," she said, her eyes welling with tears. "Just drive." Against my better judgment, I obeyed. I felt like I was caught in a dream, my mind racing as I processed the bizarre reality unfolding before me. I turned onto a darker stretch of road, the trees looming closer, blocking out the moonlight. Suddenly, Emily gasped, pointing to the right. "Stop here, please." I hit the brakes, the tires skidding slightly on the wet pavement. "What is it?" I asked, looking around nervously. She was staring at a dilapidated house hidden among the trees, its windows dark and foreboding. "This is my home," she said, her voice trembling. I looked at her, confused. "But you said you were at a party." "I was, but I need to go inside," she insisted, her eyes wide with fear. My heart raced. "I don't think this is a good idea, Emily. It looks abandoned." "I have to go," she pleaded, her voice rising. "Please." Against my instincts, I unlocked the doors, and she climbed out of the car. I watched her as she walked toward the house, the shadows swallowing her figure. Just as she reached the door, she turned back and said, "You have to understand. I can't leave until I confront what happened." "What happened?" I shouted. But she didn't answer. She vanished into the darkness, and I felt an overwhelming urge to follow her. I stepped out of the car, my heart pounding. The air felt electric, charged with a tension I couldn't explain. I hesitated at the edge of the driveway, but something urged me to keep moving. I walked toward the house, the ground crunching beneath my feet. As I approached, I could see the door slightly ajar, swaying in the breeze. I pushed it open, the hinges creaking ominously. The interior was dark, the air thick with dust and decay. "Emily?" I called out, my voice echoing in the silence. A cold draft rushed past me, and I shivered. The faint sound of whispering reached my ears, and I felt a knot of fear tighten in my stomach. I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under my weight. "Emily, where are you?" I called again, but there was no response. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me, taunting me with words I couldn't make out. I moved deeper into the house, guided by the sound. Suddenly, I entered a room lit by the pale glow of moonlight filtering through the broken windows. In the center of the room, I saw her, Emily, standing by a shattered mirror. Her reflection twisted and contorted, revealing a scene from a party, laughter echoing through the air. But then, it shifted. The laughter turned into screams, and I saw flashes of a violent struggle. Emily's eyes widened in horror, and I felt an overwhelming urge to pull her away from the mirror. "Emily, don't look!" I shouted, but it was too late. She was entranced, her eyes glazed over, lost in the nightmare unfolding before us. The whispers crescendoed, and suddenly, the reflection shattered, sending shards of glass flying through the room. I ducked, feeling the sting of glass graze my arm. When I looked up, Emily was gone, and the room was filled with an eerie silence. I stumbled back, heart racing, the realization hitting me hard. She was trapped here, bound to this place and the horrors that had transpired. I turned to leave, but the front door slammed shut, trapping me inside. Panic surged through me as I frantically pulled at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers returned, now swirling around me, growing louder and more insistent. "Help us," they begged. "Free us." I was paralyzed with fear, unsure of what to do. I could feel the cold presence surrounding me, and I stumbled back into the living room, where I had first found Emily. The mirror was intact again, reflecting the darkened room, but this time I could see shadows flitting behind me, dark figures lurking just out of sight. "Get out! Get out!" I screamed, slamming my fists against the door. Finally, with a forceful shove, the door burst open, and I tumbled out into the night, gasping for breath. I ran for my car, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't look back as I jumped into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I started the engine, my instincts telling me to get as far away from that house as possible. As I sped down the road, the whispers faded into the distance, but I could still feel their presence lurking in the shadows. It wasn't until I reached the main road that I finally felt safe. I glanced back, but all I saw was darkness. The next day, I tried to forget what had happened, convincing myself it was just a strange dream. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Emily was still out there, trapped in that house, waiting for someone to help her. To this day, I avoid that stretch of road, haunted by the memory of the woman in white. Sometimes, I wonder if I should have done more to help her. But deep down, I know some spirits are meant to linger, tied to their past, forever seeking closure in a world that has forgotten them. Now, every time I drive at night, I keep an eye on the side of the road, half expecting to see her standing there again, waiting for a ride that may never come.